Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here for this side event on strengthened hydrometeorological and early warning services in the Caribbean. This side event is really informed by the UN's Early Warning for All initiative and the Climate Risk and Early Warning Services Caribbean initiatives. We have 4 panelists this morning: Ms. Therese Turner-Jones, Ms. Eldamy Pinello from Belize, Elizabeth Riley from Sedema, and Mr. John Harding. I will ask the panelists to say something more about themselves and the organizations they represent before they respond to the question. So forgive me for my brief mention of them. I'm going to jump right into the session because we are a little bit delayed. And I'm going to start with you, Therese Turner-Jones from CDB. And my question to you is, given the United Nations Early Warning Fall Initiative and the predicted increasing intensity of future hurricanes and storms, what importance is the Caribbean Development Bank given to strengthening hydrometeorological and early warning services across its client countries and to help reduce loss and damage? I can't hear you. You can introduce yourself and say something.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Valerie. I'm the Vice President for Operations at the Caribbean Development Bank. It's a pleasure to be here. And Valerie, thanks for that important question. Early warning systems are crucial for mitigating loss of life, loss of damage, especially to physical assets, but also just to prepare populations when bad things happen, whether it's excess rainfall or rivers flooding, as we're seeing happening in Grenada and other parts of the Eastern Caribbean this week. So we place a tremendous amount of importance on developing early warning systems in individual countries, and we have an extensive program that's part of our whole resilience package for the region around disaster risk reduction. So that's my opening comment. Shall I go on a bit, Valerie, or do you want me to go on? Sure. We've been working with a number of partners for many years under different financing arrangements, essentially providing advice to member states on, 1, their policies around disaster risk reduction, 2, what an early warning system should look like, what are the components of that, 3, building capacity, because we know that that's a weakness across this region, about the importance of early warning systems. Over 14 projects across many countries. We have Belize to my left on this panel, and I'm sure she's going to talk about our work and what they're doing there. But this is I can't stress enough, given not just the UN's announcement, but our own experience with the shocks of natural disasters. Hurricane Beryl is our most recent example in July. We've had Dorian, we've had Irma, we've had Maria. And it's like having a fire alarm in your home. I mean, you want to know, or a smoke alarm, you want to know if there's danger. And think about having early warning systems for these events as having a smoke alarm in your home in the event that something bad is about to happen. So I think that's a simple approach. And what is important for countries to recognize is that it has to be very country specific, because our countries differ across this region. While there's a lot of homogeneity, there's also a lot of very idiosyncratic features of our countries. Grenada with the Grenadines, the Bahamas with family islands, Guyana with indigenous communities that are remote. So we need to be very specific about what we're talking about and design systems so that they can reach everyone. Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Therese. I'm going to move to John Harding from WMO Cruise Secretariat. So, John, acknowledging the response from CDB and drawing on your experiences, can you also share your views on what is required to assist the region and strengthen the capacity to enhance early warning systems as part of their own climate resilience.
Thank you, and good morning, and a particular thanks to the Caribbean Development Bank for bringing us here together on this important topic, and our partners in the Caribbean. So my name is John Harding, and I currently manage a dedicated financing mechanism on early warning called CRUISE, and we're very happy to have been working for a while now already in the Caribbean region. So, I mean, this is the financing COP. And I think it's obviously an opportune and a topical subject also to talk about the importance of financing early warning systems and why is it so important. I mean, if you the responsibility for issuing warnings is a central responsibility of national governments, and that's a very important principle in the context of early warning for all. So we need, national governments have to build up these systems with a certain number of those capacities can be aggregated at the regional level. So regional organizations play an important role in either mutualizing certain of the services, so providing services to groups of countries, but also for supporting the countries in this area. And if we look at this, there's a sort of dual dynamics here, because on the one hand, and I don't need to come here and tell you, obviously the Caribbeans are on the front line of the climate crisis. In WMO, we manage a lot of the science. But the extreme events are becoming larger and more frequent, and we also have a dynamic where we're seeing more people and organizations which are living in coastal areas, so more exposed. So that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, we're also seeing our ability to predict these extreme events and to provide warnings ahead of time is getting better. So the 5-day prediction of hurricanes in the Caribbean is equivalent to the 3-day prediction 10 years ago. So we know that we're getting better at providing these kind of predictions. We're getting new technologies which are making early warning systems more effective and actually cheaper. If you look in the areas of communication, we're now able to push push alerts onto cell phones. 8 out of 10 people currently now own cell phones. I suspect in the Caribbean it's a little higher even those percentages. So we have these technologies which allow us to do this. So there's really a growing expectation, and rightly so, from the population, from institutions, to have access to these better warning systems. And this is really stretching public finance and institutions in the countries which are already pretty stretched. And therefore it's important that we really have a reflection on how can we better assist in financing these programs. Our colleague from Belize, earlier in the week was referring to this challenge as in order to manage their national systems, they're going from project to project in order to finance their systems, and obviously this is not an ideal way of functioning. So in a way, if I had two messages around what we're trying to do when we're discussing this aspect of financing early warning system in the Caribbean, first of all, it's this: we need better financing, so we need these longer term solutions working through the institutions that are based within the region, so a stronger national and regional ownership of the programs, and we need to be able to finance the whole value chain of the early warning system. Obviously in this area we know there's a lot of costs that are upstream, so we need a lot of infrastructure to put in place, but it's only as effective as it relates to early action. So these are the kind of better financing solutions that we need to find. But we also have to work on the access to financing and to climate finance in this context. And here I'd really like to thank the Caribbean Development Bank. They've stepped up. We've been working with the Green Climate Fund to try and facilitate access to some of their financing. We know how challenging that can be, and we have a mechanism which can scale up or basically de-risk GCF activities where we have existing cruise financing. And the very first program of these projects that's going to go to the board of the GCF is actually from the Caribbean, with the Caribbean Development Bank in Belize and Trinidad and Tobago. And I think those are the kinds of mechanisms that we have to continue exploring and understanding better if we're really going to address this financing gap in this area. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
And thank you very much, John. And you raised some issues related to the next question I'm going to ask you. And that is, tell us about some of the successes and the lessons that you've learned from Cruise 1 that that have helped to prepare or inform the Cruise 2 initiative?
Yeah, so one of the I think one of the something I think has made a real difference in this area, and I think Caribbean has been in the forefront of that, is that we've been able to bridge what I call the capacity assessment gap. So a much better understanding of what are the priorities within the region, within the countries, and for that actually we really had to put in place a lot of the understanding, the metrics of actually how do we measure the effectiveness of early warning systems. And the Caribbean had developed what we call a checklist, but it's basically a set of indicators which help us then prioritize collectively, where are the biggest needs and gaps in the region. And so that in itself I think is a real important step, and I think hopefully moving forward we'll be able to, in the context of early warning for all, but we also have an important global target under the Sendai framework, which is to increase access for all people of early warnings, to early warning systems by 2030. I think we'll get better at holding ourselves collectively accountable on how we're going to be able to achieve these kind of targets. So I think that's one of the big priorities here and progresses, and Sedima has been playing a leading role here. So I'm certain Liz will be. Liz will be referring to that, and no, the second aspect I think is building the partnerships, the mechanisms, the systems between the institutions that need to be providing the predictions around early warning systems. So, in the case of a lot of the hydro-meteorological hazards in the Caribbean, it's the meteorological services, and represented by certain regional organizations, the Caribbean Meteorological Organization, and the early action side of the equation. So it's civil protection, it's national disaster management offices, and understanding better how the importance of building services that reach the communities. And we have a lot of jargon around these approaches. We call it people-centered, end to end, but they all have the same principles behind them, is that we have to be developing these early warning systems with a much better understanding of who are the users of these early warning systems and how can we communicate that information to them. And I think those principles are not new, but I think we've got a much better understanding now through our operations in the region how we can actually operationalize these kind of principles.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. We've been hearing both from Therese and John about the need for early warning systems to address the loss and damage, and we're interested in hearing the country perspective on how that works. So what has been your experience, Ms. Pinello, from Belize?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the question. First, let me acknowledge the Caribbean Development Bank for organizing the event, and also for being one of our key partners when it comes to the development of the country, especially in the areas of mitigation and adaptation. Belize location is vulnerable to climate change impacts. 43% of our population lives in the coastal areas, which indicates for us that aligning for us our priorities and the political will have to be before any early warning system in place. So for the fact that the government now is prioritizing the National Meteorological Service of Belize, and also with NEMO, which is a National Emergency Management Organization, put that two organizations as of two of our priorities is key. Even though we have limited human resources in the train part of where the costing, and also the limitations to service our 70 stations countrywide that is under the responsibility of two of units of my back home. So So first of all, for us to establish that, crews give us the opportunity to improve that. Unfortunately, we are not in the level that says that, yes, we have the system well established. We have a system, the common alerting protocol. The need for us to make it more effective, we need to connect that protocol with the radio stations, with media houses, with the telephone company, in order to make our population more alert to these disasters, and also to prepare them. When it comes to the crews, it gives us the opportunity of the social economic analysis and also the vulnerability risk assessment, which will guide us and also determine us with some other more vulnerability areas. We do know some vulnerability areas, but we will also need to have that database in order to get more fundings. And also with this upcoming meteorological bill, that is part of the process. So which will emphasize more the priority fact for the country. So being there, I think it's a great initiative that the country is looking forward, and will definitely reduce our loss and damage impacts. For example, this past Sunday, we were hit by Tropical Storm Sarah. And the level of flooding that we are experiencing now, especially in the area of our national head of delegation, Mr. Orlando Habet, is quite impact. Just to being a tropical storm, to the level of disaster that is being caused. And unfortunately that we don't last life like other countries. But I think the early warning system is quite very important for us in order to improve and save our lives and also the properties of all Belizeans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pinello. You highlighted the need for, and I think John also mentioned it, the need to strengthen the entire value chain. And you've identified some of the areas where you're at, but there's a little more to do. And you also mentioned the fact that you're a part of the project, the project that's going to the Green Climate Fund, partnering with CDB and the WMO, and I think Trinidad is also part of this project. So can you just tell us, Ms. Pinello, a little more about how that project will make some big changes for Belize in terms of really strengthening your early warning system? Thanks.
Thank you. I think the main impacts that this will assist our country, both of our countries, is to strengthening the multi-hazard early warning system, improving disaster risk knowledge, which is quite new for us, as we as a country used to just react on disasters, not prepare for disasters, and also the integration of developing risk profiles, online training platforms, which is needed because we need to train our people back home in order to make this system works. And also when it comes to having a hydrological system in infrastructure, the expansion and updating and upgrading of it, strengthening the early warning capacity in our country, the staff from all our prioritized units, which is NEMO and the National Meteorological System. And also very important, public outreach. We need to keep educating our public how to adapt to this new era of climate change. And I think that's the main basis of the projects. We need to alert the people and also educate them. And one of the things that I mentioned in our conversation that we have earlier this week with John is that the fact that we need to incorporate climate courses in our education level also is important in order to make it more aware to our younger generation, which will be the future for us.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights, Ms. Pinello. And I'm going to turn to Liz Riley from SEDEMA. Liz, you've heard John from the Cruise Secretariat. You've heard Ms. Pinello talk about some of the issues and some of the actions that are being taken at the national level. So can you tell us about SEDEMA's own experience in supporting early warning systems in the Caribbean, and what have been some of the outcomes of that, those undertakings?
Thank you very much, Valerie, and good morning, everyone. Liz Riley, Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And first, let me express my thanks to the CDB for not just convening this session, but also facilitating my participation. Very much appreciated. So, I want to start by saying that early warning systems is very much people-centered, which is where Therese started. It's about the people. It's about keeping people safe. And this has been at the forefront of the work by SEDEMA, in fact, predating the Early Warning Systems for All initiative. Our regional strategy on comprehensive disaster management actually has spoken to early warning systems as a priority from its second iteration, which had started in 2006. So we've been focusing on this for a while. And in fact, I think it was in recognition of that that we had the first launch of the early warning systems for all globally actually took place in the Caribbean in Barbados in February 2023. So specifically on the areas where SEDEMA has focused over the past several years, I would say there are three. One is in the area of standard setting and the development of tools. So we have been very much emphasizing a point John raised about early warning systems really being national. And very important, there has to be a strong foundation at the policy level with respect to how multi-hazard early warning systems are approached. And we have worked with our partners to provide a model early warning systems policy, which has now been adopted by a number of our states. In addition, we looked at the legislative aspects of early warning. And in 2018, I believe it was, we did a modification of the model comprehensive disaster management legislation. And through the discussions with the states, we integrated specific language on multi-hazard early warning systems within the bill, but we also articulated a regulation on early warning systems, and this was the first piece of legislation which we had available to states to guide their own legislative actions. In addition, in collaboration with the Cruise Secretariat, we worked with national emergency management coordinators and national meteorological services to articulate standard operating procedures between those two entities, and there have been some gray areas in terms of the interface between those two actors on the hydrometeorological hazards over the years, and the operational procedures are really intended to give better clarity on who does what, when, why, etc. The second area that we have worked on is really related to the evidence basis for investments in multi-hazard early warning systems. And this is really important because yes, we can spend, but the question is, what are we spending on, why, and where do the priorities lie? And so John mentioned in his intervention the work we did with the modification of the global early warning systems checklist. And the reason why we look back at that with the support of DPECO is because we felt the global instrument did not necessarily speak to all the nuances which Therese raised are realities for the Caribbean. So, for example, we integrated things like gender considerations into those checklists, and we've actually applied that checklist now in 7 or 8 of our states. And coming out of the application of the checklist, what we've been able to do is to articulate specific roadmaps. In other words, what are the priority areas for investments for those states in multi-hazard early warning systems? And that's key, because as resources come in, countries need to be clear as to where they're going to spend and why. And a third area that we've invested in is around multi-hazard early warning systems governance. And this is also critical because multi-hazard early warning systems bring several actors together. It has to. And how those actors interact is also going to inform the level of effectiveness of the systems that are in place. So at the regional level, we've launched a regional early warning systems consortium that was done back in 2017. And this has really been multi-hazard. And we have brought together not just hydrometeorological concerns, but also across the full gamut of the hazards in the Caribbean space. So it includes health for the biological related hazards, agriculture. We also have the Seismic Research Center looking at those aspects as well. And we have come up with a vision for what we want to pursue in the development of multi-hazard early warning systems in the region, and now also are working through the delineation of roles, which is very important, and how the various actors are interfacing. And also at the governance level, we've worked with our states to put forward a suggested model as to who needs to come to the table and in what types of interactions to make the multi-hazard early warning systems effective. I'll stop there, Val.
Thank you very much, Liz. I mean, these are some critical interventions necessary to have effective early warning systems in the region. And so I'm going to stick with you a little more and just ask you, so in addition to those, what are some of the other areas that you think need to be invested in?
Yes, thanks, Valerie. So there are a diversity of additional areas. I will stick to three. I think the first one I want to speak to is really, we recognize that when we look at early warning systems, there are actually four components. Many persons pay a lot of emphasis to the forecast and prediction component, but there are other components which include, for example, the understanding of the risk, and that's where I want to start. And the midterm review of both the Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy and the midterm review of the Sendai framework, they both revealed the same thing, that within the Caribbean space and globally, we are lagging behind on getting a good understanding of the risks that we're facing. And it's becoming more challenging because of the dynamics around the changing climate. So this is one of the things really that is a challenge for us when we think about it, because the hazards themselves, they are changing. And being able to understand the risk associated with something that is constantly in motion is causing a challenge. So I do think we have to put some more investment behind that. I think work, for example, with the climate group at the University of the West Indies, MONA, very critical. The first climate publication, which was done collaboratively with the CDB, have been some of the game changers, because now we have reference material that we can pick up and say, this is what we expect, this is where we expect it, and it gives us a reasonable guide. And I say a guide because, of course, we're seeing scenarios playing out that we've just never seen before, and not only the Caribbean but globally, and this is going to continue. Look what happened with Helene in the United States, for example, and I could speak to several Caribbean examples as well. So the second one is really related to looking at resilience in a holistic way. And in 2018, the heads of government had actually reached out to SEDIMA and asked the question, well, what does this word resilience really mean? How do we move this forward? And we'd worked with several partners, CDB included, many of other partners, in looking at a pathway for resilience, which encompasses the social dimensions, social protection, in fact, of the vulnerable and marginal in our populations was number one. We also looked at matters of creating economic opportunities in building resilience, safeguarding our physical infrastructure, because as we know, that's where we get a lot of losses, environmental sustainability because of those critical interactions, and of course, operational readiness and recovery. We still have to integrate those as integral components of resilience as well. So at the national level, when we are discussing resilience, we have to be very holistic in that approach and looking at also how we're integrating those conversations and actions on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And the last one I'll speak to is on the financial side. And I was glad that John raised that. And I think this is always going to be a challenge for our states because we experience hazards at the extremes, but we also experience hazards somewhere in between. And this relates to the small, what we call the smaller events, but really in the context of small states, they're not so small because they're cumulative. And so if you're getting a series of repeated events which are costing 4 or 5% of your GDP, which is not going to attract international support, you have to find the resources to treat that in some way, which is why the conversations about trigger points for the loss and damage fund are absolutely critical, and we're really hoping to see some movement on that in COP29. But the investments also have to be at a transformational scale because we've been spending money on early warning, and my colleague from Belize mentioned this, we've been spending on early warning for several years. And the question is, have we been able to really deliver big change? And probably not, because the scale of the investment is not at the level which is absolutely necessary. And I also think that the investment has to be done along a programmatic focus where we're very clear on the results that we're trying to deliver. So there are other things that could be said, of course, Valerie, but I will stop there. I think those are the key points.
Thank you, Liz. The points you raise are quite important because not only are we looking at the amount of finance, the time that's required, the actors, as you say, and the various roles that are required, when they play those roles, and how everything comes together. I mean, it's quite complex, but it is doable. And so with the appropriate commitment, from you talked about political will. It was really good to hear Ms. Pinello talk about the government of Belize and some of the interventions that they're making, which is a big step to highlight early warning systems and have it as a critical part of business. So I'm going to ask my last question. It was supposed to be for Therese, but I'm going to put it to all the panelists. And for Ms. Pinello, I would want you to say what institutions like SEDIMA, the WMO Secretariat, CRUISE, and CDB could do to assist. And the question is that countries are required, by 2025, the countries are required to submit their NDCs, the number 3. And these should be incorporating early warning systems, these services. So in this regard, to Therese, or in fact I will start with John. To John, what support can the CRUISE provide, the Secretariat WMO provide to countries? To Liz, what support SEDIMA? I will end with Therese, but after Liz, I will ask Ms. Pinello what support you think these agencies and others could provide to a country like Belize or the other countries to strengthen these NDCs. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'd very much like to come back on your I think very nicely termed complex but doable, and focus on the doables because it is complex, but it is. You're right, it is doable. So yeah, we do expect the NDCs. They already reflect a lot of early warning as a priority, and we expect the next round will probably even give it more priority. So I think collectively we're going to have to step up from our CRUISE side. We're starting a discussion now around of course, scaled up financing, but no, I think hopefully it came across very clearly from our discussion here. It's also about better financing, and I think we really have to have a robust discussion around how we're going to bridge that capacity gap. But with a very I think positive perspective. I think we could be on the cusp of actually really making sure that those basic systems are available in all countries, and with some of these innovations coming in. I mentioned earlier on, if we can put in place, we're discussing the next phase of financing for the Caribbean with the International Telecommunication Union, for example, to work with cell broadcast national telecom regulators to provide cell broadcast technology to these islands. So I really see a strong opportunity, and we'd obviously like to be part of that solution. But I think we will certainly continue working with and look forward to continuing our strong partnership with the regional institutions in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Liz?
Thanks, Valerie. So, two things. I would say one is with respect to advocacy, because I think at the national level, we still have a ways to go in terms of how we are treating issues of risk between the disaster risk management lens and the climate change adaptation lens. And there's so much integration that is required, and I feel as if sometimes we're not pulling the best in one direction. Probably that's the best way to say it. And I think this is something that from the SEDEMA end we will continue to advocate for. The country work programs that we support in the States are very much designed to support adaptation actions, and I think that has to be reflected. The second area is related to on the financing side, because more and more you would recognize that partners have a preference for working regionally and not necessarily bilaterally. And SEDEMA, we view ourselves as a very important conduit and connector around that for providing financial resources to the states, and we plan to continue that work. We do see the cruise initiative as an important one. We are about to sign off an agreement now on some areas related to that, but we also are looking at other opportunities for more direct investment in early warning systems for states, and we will continue to mobilize resources around that and make them available to the states as well.
Thank you. And I will I'm going to end with Therese, go to Ms. Pinello. How can these agencies support Belize further?
Thanks. Quite important. I will align myself with John and the representative of SEDEMA. That is very important to have the financial part of it, but also align it. Make sure that the team need that level of capacity in order to get that database that we need to reflect in our NDC. The Belize NDC is quite ambitious, the NDC 2.0. So at this point, we are meeting with stakeholders in order to have a NDC 3.0 that is realistic in order to make it happen. Having a quite good document doesn't mean that implementation phase will be successful. So for us, it's quite important that our team back home that are in charge of responsibility when it comes to weather and database of weather, they also have that longevity, and also the implementation phase is quite important for us. So implementation phase always comes with finance and capacity building, and make sure that for the upcoming years is there. So we need to have a long-term plan, not a short-term plan, just to meet the NDC reporting, but also to have that readiness and preparedness to all levels in order to get that database that we need. Because For us, data is important, and I think we are lacking that in that aspect of early warning systems.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pinello. And I will end with you, Therese.
This has been a very, very rich conversation, so I want to thank my panelists. And I'm glad Ms. Pinello raised the issue of data because this is crucial for early warning systems. And to John's point, we need to be able to not just predict well, but we need to have accurate information. And just a plug for UE, that work that UE does, they've been tracking rainfall data over decades. And that status report that was done, the first one, and we hope to continue to support them in producing this annually, would really give us very, very good information, good data, good empirics on what's happening with the climate in this region. I want to pull all of this conversation together by talking a little bit about finance as it was touched on. And just to say that CDB has been upgraded by the Green Climate Fund to support projects up to $250 million. And so we hope to have some of those resources dedicated to this work across the region. As we're also going into the Special Development Fund, which is our concessional window, a new cycle, we look to earmark a portion of those resources also for this work. And just to say in my personal view, but also I think the policy of the bank is this work on disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management has to be mainstream throughout all of our national policies. So as Belize has mentioned, having a great NDC document is a first step. And NDC 3, the National Determined Commitments Document 3, is to focus more on adaptation, mitigation around the fact that our hazards are becoming more and more intense. So looking at coastal events, more rainfall, these crazy things like in Valencia and what's happening in Grenada and St. Vincent and Jamaica this week, we can't ignore the fact that our everyday existence is being affected by these events. And lastly, we have to make the connection with our fiscal performance and budgets, because without a strong fiscal positions, and every single natural hazard disaster affects those budgets in a very negative way. So this is also about protecting the future resources of countries to be able to provide the necessary services for citizens of people in the region. So I want to thank everyone for being here this morning and our audience, and also the beauty of these kinds of events is we're able to amplify our voices through our online audiences. So we want to thank the videographer for producing this event, and we're hoping that it reaches a lot of people across this region. So thank you very much for being with us.
And before we end, I want to thank the audience, but also give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions to the panelists that you may have. You have a few minutes, so any questions you may have. Perfect.
Hi, good morning. Eugene Williams. Let me admit my ignorance with respect to this whole issue at the start, but just listening to the session, I am seized with the fact that we are discussing the issue, let's say, downstream, at the end of the pipeline, if you want to call it that. But I think we need to link this, all the information that you is doing on the study with rainfall, the experience of SEDIMA and the cruise secretariat, to our national level planning, right? And then bring it down to the community level, which is like the county councils or in different jurisdictions, they call them different things, so that you sort of mitigate or reduce the potential impact of these events when they happen. Because if proper planning is done, building codes, zoning, so that You don't be in the areas where historically rainfall levels or whatever is heavy. You reduce the risk of flooding and disasters and that sort of thing. So I think it has to link back up, straight up, to that level to have a holistic impact at the end of the day. All right, because we continuously give building permits for things in areas that we know if there is a event, it is going to cause some dislocation, but we do it continuously year after year after year after year. It's just a circular cycle that goes on. So where do we start in getting it right?
Thank you. Would any of the panelists want to respond? Ms. Pinello, do you want to start?
Thank you for the question, and I would agree. Hence, the reason is necessary, and that's part of the project that the government will enhance that disaster risk vulnerability assessment. That we need to know where are the vulnerable areas, the areas that are not areas for communities to be developed, etc. So one part of the reason when I mentioned that database and information is key important in order to have that early risk assessment and also to protect our people back home.
Thank you. Igor, go ahead, Liz.
Yes, and I think Eugene is right on the mark. And I think this is what Therese was alluding to in her intervention when I was speaking about the holistic approach, because at the end of the day, there has to be a developmental vision that speaks to resilience. And I would say not only nationally, but I think perhaps one of the gaps that we have is that we also need to work on that vision regionally, because we've not actually articulated that in terms of a long-term developmental vision for CARICOM. So that's something that we need to invest in. But certainly, you're absolutely correct. This is the message that CDB promotes, CDEMA promotes, Cruz promotes. We're seeing it coming through in Belize, so right on the mark.
Thank you, Liz.
Just want to add one point that I think is really important that Eugene raised, which is what happens at the community level. So CDB has built into its overall strategy resilience, environmental resilience, and this is very much a part of our story, saying that at the national level, it needs to be baked in at multiple intersections. So this point about zoning, point about information and communicating it to every single citizen, absolutely crucial, because unless it becomes sort of in our thinking all the time, we will continue to make mistakes. And I'm particularly seized because I come from a country that is very tourism dependent, like Belize and other countries in this region, the Bahamas, where we continue to put our most important economic assets right on the coast. And there is no policy about locating hotels not on the coast but somewhere else. If you go to a city like Rio in Brazil, there's no construction on the coast. Now that may have been for other reasons initially, but I think we're starting to see that doesn't really make long-term sense. But of course, in the short term, we want to please investors who want to have those beautiful locations to locate, multiple thousand room properties. And this will continue to be an issue as things get worse. Mitigating any damage to those assets will become even more expensive. So I think more information, more discussion, more community-based type conversations around what we're doing as nations, but also as individual states, and to Liz's point, regionally, do we take a stand on some of these issues? How do we protect, most importantly, our human assets, but also our physical assets, because they're very, very expensive, one, to insure, but also two, to replace.
Thank you. John, any comment to round us off and close us off?
Nicely said by the colleagues. So just to we share the same the same principle of, I think it's very important that we see early warning systems as part of these wider disaster risk management strategies and approaches, and that in the wider context of development. And that has repercussions on many of the things that we do. So we really can't stress it enough as important principles.
So with that, I just want to thank the panelists and thank you, the audience, for really taking the time to be here. It's much appreciated. So thank you.